Hurries-on.
Where are you taking me?
It's a blitzball tournament.
Oh no! I asked you.
Yeah, I knew it was this. I knew it was this fucking ugly game.
Everyone says Reyes is a good shot.
Yeah, and good arrows for both of us.
Too many colors, man. It's ugly.
It's a lot of colors.
It's the equivalent of a airbrush side of a van.
I wish.
Let me explain. First of all, hello. Welcome to the first hot takeout video that is actually a negative take of mine. Yay! I can't believe it took like 4 of these to get to an actually spicy take of mine, but here we are. Secondly, hey folks, here's a list of people not to be mad at if you decide to be mad about this opinion. Can you tell the internet has traumatized me over the years, or what? Me, for having this completely subjective opinion. The developers of the games. And the individual concept artists of the game especially. I have nothing but deep admiration and empathy for art teams on games. Like, you have a cool idea that you're way into creating, and at any moment your boss can just reject the whole thing and force you to make the ugliest shit of your life, because hey, that's your job. With that out of the way, here's the hot take. I think Horizon's really ugly! Like, why do people want to look at this for 60 hours? That's... ugh. I'm an old lady who's been out of art college for over a decade now, and it's been even longer than that since I took a color theory class, so bear with me as I forget the exact terminologies of the things I'm trying to explain here. Right now you're probably thinking, what the hell is wrong with you? Horizon's graphics are gorgeous, next level jaw-dropping. You seen the peach fuzz on this hoe's face? And I want to stop you right there. Stop. Don't. I'm not talking about graphical fidelity. That is not the take. The graphics are crazy in this game. Trust me, I'm way into the peach fuzz. Put more peach fuzz on all the ladies. Hashtag fuzz up my girls. And I also want to explain my statement here about too many colors. That was me being, you know, hyperbolic. What was I gonna go on a whole detailed rant about composition and values right on the stream then and there? I'm not a damn freak. No, I was gonna make a reductive statement for mildly comedic effect that people were gonna mock me for when they took it at complete total face value. The girl who's dressed like this hates colors? Yeah, man. Whoa, you got me. Anyway, let's unreductive that statement because yes, too many colors is a bonkers take on the face of it. Here I go!
It's all so beautiful, but it's too much! Too many colors!
I love colors? Duh! Look at me! However, a visual and spatial reasoning issue can sometimes rear its head when a piece of media is oversaturated and densely packed with many colors. This can be prevented by using simple shapes as seen in stuff like Katamari Damacy. If the prince was high-res and had peach fuzz and every object in the game was photorealistically detailed, the already hyper-candy-colored game would almost certainly be incredibly hard to visually parse. Psychonauts 2 has some incredibly psychedelic moments, but you're rarely genuinely confused in navigating those spaces. This is not only due to the striking and iconic shapes of the characters in the levels, but also due to how the level is laid out and lit. It's all very intentional game design. Level designers, artists, lighting artists, animators, and more combining their talents to lead your eye, and therefore you, the player, around to the most important things. And it comes naturally. It doesn't feel like you're being led around by the hand in order to progress, so the self-satisfaction of navigating the space feels really good. Now, I'm not claiming that Horizon isn't intentional with its environments or anything, but the fact that much of it takes place in fairly dense, very high fidelity, and quite colorful environments leads to a lot more visual confusion. For example, the yellow tells of things that you can grapple and interact with, they kind of blend in when everything else around it is also pretty damn colorful. But I'm going to talk about that a bit more later. This kind of confusion is prevented in another vast open world game that is way less focused on graphical fidelity because, well, the Switch is the Switch. Breath of the Wild. Yeah, we're tired of hearing of it. I don't care. It's still relevant. The console's graphical limitations were probably a good thing. And Breath of the Wild makes up for it with a stylized art direction, a more muted color palette, and environmental design that was very carefully constructed to urge you to explore more. This all results in a game that is completely understandable at a glance, easy on the eyes, and easy to navigate. Because when everything looks equally as vibrant and important, a player is more likely to flounder about, forget what they're doing, get distracted, and get lost. Low-key, this is one of the reasons why I think Horizon's protagonist, Aloy, is pretty chatty.
The shuttle's caught up in those cables. I'm gonna have to climb the tower to find a way to disconnect them. Now, how to get up the tower? Scanning with my focus could help here. I've gotta climb closer to the shuttle to detach the cables. Okay, the creaking doesn't sound good. I'm gonna have to detach those cables quick. This should be the right spot. There. That connector's holding the cables together. It should break if I shoot it. One down. I just need to climb higher and attach the second set of cables.
Yeah, a lot of game protagonists talk out loud to kind of help you through a level, but I think the devs actually nerfed how chatty she was in a patch? I'm not sure, maybe it was only for her comments on picking up materials? I don't feel like doing even more research right now. I've done too much. I don't want to look at this stuff anymore. But I'm sure someone's going to correct me on that in the comments. Anyway, when I was watching my partner play the second game, I was taken aback by how often Aloy reminds the player of what they were doing, where they were going, and what they ought to do next. Like, I cannot find this part of the game to save my life anymore, and I do not want to keep searching for it. I'm really annoyed. But like, there was a part, I don't think it was during a tutorial, but she was climbing Aloy comes to like a cliff, right? And she's like, gotta climb this cliff. It's like, okay. So you start climbing the cliff, and like along the way, she says like 2 more times that she is climbing the cliff, her progress up this cliff. And, you know, like, halfway there, almost there, you know, stuff like that. And then at the top, she goes, "Phew, glad that's over," or something. And I was like, wow, what was that for? I swear to God this happened. I cannot find the part of the game where this occurred. I don't know. Maybe I had a very specific dream about this game. But whatever. She came off as like pretty handholdy to me with all this chatting. And please don't comment like, oh, there's a plot reason she talks all the time to herself. She's a loner and an outcast, and that's why she's always talking to herself out loud. Because like, I'm kind of sick of hearing that already. That's a pretty unconvincing justification for the amount of hand-holding that I've seen. I mean, I'm a loner and an outcast and probably neurodivergent, and I'm not constantly narrating my life.
Okay, and now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put this here as a placeholder, right? Okay. Live skit here. That ought to do it. And I'll come back to this later when I have a good idea for a live skit. But for now, I should continue editing the rest of my video. I can always come back later. Yeah, I'll do that. That makes sense.
Anyway, I have a theory that Horizon's color design is a backlash to the 2010's AAA monochrome color palette. Not necessarily like a cognizant, like, we'll get back at those gray-ass, brown-ass games sort of decision, but like, you know, aesthetic cycles are a real thing. Like, you know how the 1960s was all like whacked out colorful? And then bam, the 70s happened and everything turned to actual dirt with some orange in there. Then the 80s and 90s happened and everyone went to neons as a backlash to the earthy tones of the 70s. Then the aughts and the 2010s were back to muted monochrome style color palettes. Your grays, your browns, your blues. And now it's 2022 and everybody's a rainbow-haired freak and it rolls. Aesthetic cycles! I wonder if we're going to see another return to muted colors in about 10 years or so? I don't know. Could happen. Maybe. But anyway, to wrap up this little section of the video, it may sound kind of crazy, but when there's this much color going on, it actually makes a game less distinctive, on par with the muted, boring colors in the early aughts games. Here's a bunch of game screenshots that I blurred. Can you tell which ones are which games easily? Maybe you can. Maybe you're very good at this. But the ones with fewer colors and simpler shapes are probably going to be a lot more recognizable. Too much brown or too much gray can have almost the same visual effect as too much color. Nothing really stands out. Remember when Fury Road came out and everyone was rightfully going bonkers about how well edited it was? How editor Margaret Sixel made sure all the action takes place almost exactly in the center of the frame so your eyes didn't have to dart around to find points of interest to focus on? Well, video games don't have that luxury outside of cutscenes a lot of the times. The camera in most AAA games is in the control of the player generally. And this creates a problem. How to make sure the player is taking in the correct information, making informed, purposeful decisions, and going the right way in general. One solution is, of course, to wrest control of the camera for a cutscene to show off the very important thing. Oh god, please don't miss this, it's literally your objective, it's right fucking there! When that isn't an option during active gameplay, the game has to rely on visual cues. And baby, I'm talking color, contrast, and composition/environmental density. And, okay, I should probably lay down some quick definitions of those things. Color, meaning, you know, hues, the rainbow, Roy G. Biv, that guy. This is all wrapped up in color theory, which I'm not gonna get too deep into because this video's long enough, but keep an eye out for when orange is paired up with blue. It happens a lot, and I'm gonna bring it up a bit more later. Contrast just means like something here is different than something else, so it sticks out. There's different kinds of contrast, but personally here I'm using it to mean the differences between light areas and dark areas in a scene. How stark or wishy-washy is that difference? High contrast helps with visibility, especially when there's a lack of colors. The more monotone an image is, the more important the light and dark contrast will be to keep things visually understandable. For example, if we desaturated that Mad Max footage from earlier, it still looks pretty damn good. You can understand all the things that are happening in it. Ghost of Tsushima. Wow, it's really hard to say that name, actually. Ghost of Tsushima came with a Kurosawa mode that desaturated the game entirely and like added a film grain or whatever. It's not quite the look of its namesake, but it does prove a decent point that the devs were pretty aware of their lighting. And if you do this to Horizon, it's like, I guess it depends on the scene, but it's not as good as Ghost of Tsushima. And finally, composition, meaning how things are arranged for you to visually take in. How many objects are in the scene and how are they distributed? How many colors, how many lights and shadows, and how much movement? Scene composition greatly affects the focus of the player or the viewer. In addition to Fury Road making use of color contrast and being very cognizant of its light and shadow contrast, it completes this trifecta with framing its shots so centrally. However, since the games we're talking about have cameras that are largely in control of the player, shot composition isn't quite applicable, so I'm just calling it environmental density. How much clutter is up in this place? Can you see your objective from here, or is there like a bunch of junk in the way? Is that junk distracting, or is it part of the exploration factor? And you know, it just keeps on coming down to this. The simpler the aesthetic is, the easier it is to lead a player to the correct solution or path. Portal was an FPS puzzle genre pioneer in this way. By taking place in a sterile, simple laboratory environment, players could easily suss out what their objectives were visually, and the only hard part was learning how to use the portal gun, which was a pretty brain-bending game mechanic at the time. And by the way, if you haven't played Portal with the developer commentary on, you're really missing out in my opinion.
Early versions of Portal featured more detailed, cluttered environments, much like Half-Life 2. We quickly realized that unnecessary objects scattered all over the place distracted players to the point where it actually interfered with the Portal training process. So we simplified the art style to favor clean, focused test chambers. The modular approach we settled on makes it look plausible that the chambers can reform dynamically on these pistons.
It's a game with pretty much no cutscenes and very few overt tutorial moments, relying instead on the player's natural curiosity and experimentation, which is encouraged by the simplicity of the game's design. It has very low environmental density, so the objectives are clear and the player is not distracted too easily. It uses the simplest, highest contrast colors possible for its environments: white, gray, black, tiny bits of red. These are totally different colors from the active gameplay mechanic colors, orange and blue for the portals. Remember how I mentioned orange and blue before? Yep, it's that color wheel thing. Complementary colors are the hues that are opposite each other on the wheel, and when they're smacked up next to each other, they kind of pop. This is why so many action movie posters are orange and blue, by the way. Most human skin tones are warm, somewhere along the orange spectrum, and most posters in general feature the main character's big-ass face. So their skin tones are often paired with cool blues to make the poster more eye-catching. This, of course, predates movie posters, big time, but I like using modern examples because now you can notice this in real life too. Wow. Okay, now I want to talk real quick about neon white, because it's an excellent modern example of what I'm kind of talking about here. This is an FPS that uses color, contrast, and low environmental density to keep the player moving fast, staying focused, and being capable of reacting in a second to new visual information rushing at them. Then, of course, when neon white does visually overwhelm you on purpose to raise the stakes, it feels appropriate. Even though it's a scramble to parse the level, you've seen enough of this stuff by this point that adding more visual complexity is a reasonable difficulty spike to keep things interesting. The levels are mostly white, the demons are mainly black, and this high contrast choice makes the enemies immediately visually apparent. The cards are a variety of colors, and the projectiles are color-coded to what weapon the demon will drop. This is a really clear, consistent visual language. It just works. Another example I want to bring up is Uncharted, whose influence on games like Tomb Raider and Horizon are pretty obvious, even though Horizon is open world and the others aren't. But whatever, Uncharted is a great example of an action game from the early aughts that didn't go all the way with that monochrome brown-gray-blue wash. While there's definite monochrome and washed out bits, they're used to contrast the strikingly colorful bits, making them impressive and memorable. Uncharted also uses mist and clouds to create a sense of real depth in the environment, which is something that Horizon went a little too whole hog on in my opinion, because Jesus Christ, look, it is so humid here, ah!
How many banners do you see?
I can't see shit with this fog, even if those are there.
Ugh, all the humidity from getting all these clips of Horizon has completely frizzed my hair.
Who's setting off smoke bombs in the distance? Jesus! Nobody better get pedantic on me about how, like, real life can look like this. This is an all-day effect that happens in Horizon. This only happens, like, during certain environmental conditions during certain times of the day in real life, so shut the fuck up! Anyway, Uncharted was one of the firsts to deal with a major visual parsing problem that crops up in somewhat realistic-looking adventure games. How do we know which ledges are grabbable, climbable? In linear games like Uncharted and Tomb Raider, there's probably only a few correct paths to proceed, so it's incredibly important that the player doesn't get stuck on something as stupid as, I didn't know I could climb that, ugh. And because of that, say hello to the conveniently colorful or conveniently contrasted ledge. I call it Please Climb Me paint. And when the conveniently colorful or contrasted ledge isn't an option in games that would look really weird as hell with them, the go-to solution is detective vision, a la Arkham Asylum. This did, however, lead to a bit of a problem where players would simply play the whole game in detective vision, which is a bit of a waste, huh? They spent all this time making the game look dark and brooding and Batman-y, and the players are walking around in this garish orangey blue cyber zone. That's a shame. And here's what's weird. Batman, with its largely monochrome dark aesthetic, has the same solution to finding climbable, interactable places as the hyper-saturated Horizon: detective vision. But why is that? Like I said reductively earlier, too many colors. Horizon is a game that takes place in the super distant future, but still there's some structures around with, you know, you guessed it, Please Climb Me paint. Damn, that's some sturdy paint to last, I don't know, 10,000 years? How long is this? Whatever. But there's also a bunch of natural formations that Aloy can climb. God, I don't like her name, Aloy. Bleh. But there's also a bunch of natural formations that Aloy can climb that wouldn't make sense to have Please Climb Me paint on them, so that's where detective vision largely comes in. Okay, it's called the focus in this, but you know, whatever. Detective vision. The way detective vision works in this game is also a lot like how it works in Batman. It, you know, decodes data and it highlights suspicious or interactable stuff in the area in a color that reoccurs all the time in the rest of the environments, in the flora, fauna, the sky, and it can disappear during certain times of the day, which, This is a bit of a random aside that I couldn't fit anywhere else in the video, but shout out to Horizon Zero Dawn's absolutely nuclear sunsets that tint everything a shade of red that you don't really normally see outside of Argento films. Is the sun sick? Speaking of comparing Horizon 1 and 2, I want to talk about the climbing mechanics in both of them. Did the climbing actually get worse in Forbidden West? Well, kind of. The thing is, there were way less ledges in Zero Dawn, so it was clearer where you could actually climb. Plus, the ledges tended to kind of jut out in more obvious ways, like you'd have a flattish kind of surface with these climbing ledges kind of modeled in such a way that they're almost clipping out of the surface. It doesn't look like a real ledge that you might find in nature, but it does look like something you can climb on. One of the criticisms of the first Horizon was that climbing was a bit janky, but when Horizon Forbidden West came out, well... While there are more places to climb, the increased graphical fidelity makes it far more difficult to intuit the specific places where you are allowed to climb. The first Horizon's focus ability didn't highlight the climbable rocks, and that's probably because, like, it wasn't that necessary because there was less of them, and I mean, look at them, they're jutting right out there. So unfortunately, it seems like increasing the visual fidelity of Horizon from Zero Dawn to Forbidden West actually lowered the player's ability to interact with the environment confidently. Hence the focus's new ability to scan the terrain, in addition to the highlighting of enemy asses.
Enemy ass detected.
God, I haven't even mentioned all the pollen and dust and bugs just constantly in motion, flitting about my screen distractingly. It's kinda hard to naturally and quickly focus on the gameplay objectives, right? Oh shit, is that why it's called the focus? 'Cause I can't focus without it? My point is, the focus is a band-aid for a lot of problems that are better solved by a change in art direction. Which, don't get me wrong, that is not something I think is easy to do. Especially when you've already got an established look from a previous game. So, like, of course, they had to add something that attempted to clear the noise. But Jess, aren't you comparing apples to oranges to bananas to Batmans? You've compared the Horizon games, which are open-world third-person adventure exploration games, to an FPS puzzle game from forever ago, a modern FPS speedrunning game, and some linear third-person adventure games. Shouldn't you be comparing Horizon to games of its same genre that came out around the same time? And okay, here we go. Yes, I already talked about Breath of the Wild, but I have things to say. It's just so relevant. Also, it's my show, so shush. I just want to know, like, why can't Aloy just climb whatever? Breath of the Wild nailed this. You can climb literally anything, with the exception of surfaces that are wet or made of this one special shrine material so that you can't cheese the shrine puzzles by climbing over everything, which is completely fair. And you know, if your stamina drains before the top of the climb, that's also quite bad. But those are the only limitations placed on this incredible mechanic of total fucking freedom. And the limitations are used incredibly well to bar you from doing anything too out of wild ass order, unless you're especially skilled or insanely determined, in which case, hell, you deserve it. Good for you, you crazy little bastard. Those limitations only make it more tasty to conquer or revisit an area later on when you're more confident and have better equipment. Pivoting away from Zelda to another open world game that has climbing and such, the modern Assassin's Creed games. Which, you know, I have my own criticisms of. I'm not really that into them, and yes, there's too many damn markers on the maps, but I can more easily understand what's climbable in this game because they simply, you know, mostly let you just climb stuff. There's no need to translate what's climbable or not. If you want to skip some stuff, climb around it, find an alternate route, go ahead, whatever. The game developers designed the challenges of the game with the idea in mind that players might try to climb around it. If you're gonna put climbing in your game, you have to consider that you put climbing in your game. But there was a groundbreaking amount of trust put into the player in Breath of the Wild. God damn it, I'm talking about Breath of the Wild again, shit! After a bit of tutorializing on the Great Plateau, the world is your oyster. Go get messy and make mistakes, Link. And in Horizon, there's just such a weird amount of hand-holding that comes in and out that I just can't help but feel like the game still doesn't trust me to tie my own shoes even hours into it. Like I said, I don't know if they changed this with that verbosity patch that I may or may not have imagined or dreamt about, but I swear I recall Aloy solving puzzles out loud before you could even take in the environment. All these games are practically the same genre, but like, why does one feel like freedom and one feels like I'm on one of those child leashes? There's a bunch of factors, obviously. This is not me going like, aha, I've figured it out or something. This is also just my opinion, also, obviously. And I don't blame the art direction for everything I don't like about Horizon, but I think the general visual busyness of the game is somewhat related to how much it doesn't trust the player to figure things out for themselves. It almost feels like they had this dense, vibrant, drop-dead gorgeous look of the game sorted out before they considered how players would actually process and interact with those visuals.
It's an art style that suits the game while fulfilling the playability demands without losing a feeling of reality. So what's playability? The pleasantness of behaviors or visuals based on gameplay, or in other words, function. For a game, the optimization of the pleasantness of the game cycle and response is the most important thing. A reality players can sink into. This is also very important. As you move further away from realness, both tempo and visibility improve and the level of pleasantness increases, but the reality of the world is apt to be lost. That being said, if you place too much importance on the realness of behavior and presentation, you can damage a pleasant game cycle and responsiveness.
And maybe, as a result, maybe that's why we have detective vision and please climb me paint and a really chatty hand-holdy protagonist, all to keep the player from realizing that without those things, they might be lost, confused, and unable to progress. The worry, and it's not a crazy thing to be worried about if you're making a game, is that if the player is ever frustrated in the slightest bit, they might stop playing the game. And of course, on the other end of that design ethos is the Soulsborne games, which thrive on their difficulty and do not give a shit if you're frustrated. But meanwhile, they're also visually stunning in their own ways. And oh god, this video is already creeping up on a half hour long, so I cannot possibly get into why Elden Ring looks a lot better than Horizon to me. So no, I'm stopping here. No. No segue. But one more thing I want to mention about Horizon Forbidden West is its use of hero lighting on the PS5 version of the game. I actually didn't know about this until 3 days before this video was released. But yeah, on the right side of the screen there's basically an invisible light source following Aloy herself around, totally independent of the environment's natural light sources. Its job is to make sure that she's always got a bit of a glowy backlight on her so she pops in any environment. This is kind of like when you put a drop shadow on text so it's easier to read. You're upping the contrast. It's a bit jarring for me, but most people won't notice it. But it's yet another thing that had to be done to help this game communicate visually with the player. Alright, in conclusion, it's pretty clear that the Horizon games are what most people would call extremely pretty. Absolutely sure, you're not crazy to look at this stuff and say, that's pretty. It's fine to think this is pretty. It's fine. It's cool. You're fine. To me, however, it's just a lot. It's overly pretty. It becomes cloying and gaudy and honestly, like a little bit boring after a certain point. Like, when everything's pretty and eye-catching, nothing is. Also, it looks like a fucking Thomas Kincaid painting you'd see in your grandma's house. Come on, gamers! Has the aesthetic cycle wrapped around so tight that we now think grandma stuff looks cool? Here's your doilies, gamers. Yes, this whole video was to Kincaid shame you. Gotcha. The end. Don't be mad at me. One good thing I want to say about Horizon at the end of the video, thanks for watching, by the way, it was a straight up good idea to have a redheaded ginger protagonist in a game that has a lot of like lush, green, foresty environments. Straight up good classic color wheel stuff, the oranges and the reds versus the greens and the blues, and that's excellent stuff. Looks great, good idea. They learned from the greats. Like Crash Bandicoot.